No one remembered why the war started. It was too far back, even for the machines. Records said it began with a misunderstanding, then a retaliation, then a genocide, and then another. Every species blamed the others. Alliances formed, fell apart, reformed, collapsed again. But somehow, in the chaos, the humans made the galaxy bleed. And then, just like that, they disappeared. Vanished into their own corner of space. No more skirmishes, no diplomacy, no outposts, no interference, a full retreat. They sealed their borders and left the rest of the galaxy to choke on the ashes of its own greed. They called it the Armistice, a signed agreement, witnessed by 17 ruling species and encoded into the stars themselves, a pact between humans and the rest. No war, no crossing borders, no contact. For 3,000 years. They kept it. At least the humans did. I was born in the final year of the Armistice, in the ruins of Europa Station orbiting Jupiter. They trained us like they knew what was coming. Not like soldiers, like executioners. The difference is in the eyes. Soldiers shoot to win. Executioners shoot to finish. They gave us history lessons wrapped in classified files, names no one else dared speak anymore. Fails are Trek Dominion, Ura Mindborn, the Eshir Collective, the ones who tried to erase us. We memorized every species that voted for our destruction 3,000 years ago. Then we memorized their weaknesses. We didn't say we wanted revenge. We didn't have to. We were humanity's second draft, the patient version, the cold version. So when the 3,000th year came, and the clock ticked down to its last second, everyone waited. Nothing happened. No attack. No message. No sign of movement from Earth or Mars or Titan or the outer defense grid. Just silence. That was the mistake. They thought we'd gotten soft, that our silence was peace, that isolation had made us forget. They sent the first warning shot 3 months after the treaty expired. An Eshir battleship drifted just inside our border, cloaked and curious, scanners wide open, broadcasting in their mother tongue. It was the last thing they ever did. We didn't answer. We didn't warn. We erased them. Every Eshir colony screamed for aid on the same day. All signals ended in static. The galaxy watched in horror. And we smiled. I was on Black Soil Station, a forgotten weapons facility buried beneath Mercury's crust. We hadn't been told what to expect, only that when the armistice ended, we wouldn't be soldiers anymore. We'd be weapons. I remember standing next to Commander Durek, the man who raised me, trained me, beat the hesitation out of me. We watched the stars on the holoscreen. Dozens of alien fleets mobilizing near the old neutral zones. Durek didn't flinch. "They're gonna push," I said. He nodded once. "Let 'em." 3 hours later, the declaration came. Galactic Assembly emergency broadcast. The treaty has been violated. Humanity has resumed hostilities. This is a formal declaration of war. The room went quiet. Then came the moment that still lives in my veins. Durek turned to us, 5 rows of operatives born in silence, raised in death. He smiled. Time to remind them why they feared us. No cheers, no applause, just quiet nods and the sound of loading weapons. Because we weren't here to fight. We were here to end the war they forgot we won last time. We didn't wait for orders. We were the orders. Once war was declared, every outpost command went dark. No more open transmissions, no more diplomacy. That wasn't cowardice. It was doctrine. The old tactics didn't apply anymore. We weren't just fighting another war. We were fulfilling a promise older than our bones. I was deployed to Sector 19, codenamed Deadlight. A barren stretch of deep space that used to be home to the Trek Dominion, one of the first species to vote for Earth's annihilation centuries ago. They'd rebuilt since then. Ships, stations, satellites, colonies. Their arrogance made them loud. loud was easy to find. I was team lead for Ghost Team V4. 5 of us bred, raised, and enhanced for stealth, destruction, and silence. No names, only code tags. I was V41, the others, V42 through V45. We didn't need to speak. We knew the rhythm. We knew the choreography of death. The drop came swift, clean, and untraceable. We exited warp inside the gravity shadow of Trek's Loxus moon, a cold mining colony known more for its production than its defenses. That was their second mistake. Our boots never touched the ground. We descended via vertical drop capsules, cutting silently through the atmosphere like surgical blades. No flames, no heat trails, carbon-skinned and signal-dead. By the time their sensors picked us up, we were already inside. V43 took the Eastern comm relay. 1 shot. No alarm. V42 disabled their defense AI with a viral ghost code. I handled the central command tower. It wasn't hard. Most of them weren't soldiers. They were engineers, workers, civilians. But that didn't matter anymore. They'd declared war. We didn't start it, but we would make damn sure we finished it. I cleared the control room in 22 seconds. 2 Trek officers tried to surrender. They raised their claws, their frills flashing yellow, their species' sign of submission. I shot both through the brainstem. We weren't here for prisoners. We weren't here for mercy. Once the area was secured, I activated the signal. Re-die. It was a simple code, untraceable, unencrypted, a ghost pulse sent across hundreds of human satellites hiding in dead space. A minute later, I watched from the rooftop as the sky split open. No sound. No warning. 3 orbital railguns fired from low Mercury orbit, synced to our position by nanosecond-level targeting algorithms. The beams weren't visible. They were kinetic rods, solid metal spears dropped at terminal velocity. 1 hit the moon's central mining district. The second struck the habitat dome. The third hit their main reactor. I saw buildings lift off the ground like feathers. Shockwaves rolled like liquid. Fire followed, then silence. By the time the Trek Empire scrambled a response fleet, there was nothing left to save. Loxus Moon was just another crater. And we were already gone. You have to understand something. This wasn't revenge. This was calibration. We weren't just exterminating enemies. We were sending messages. And the message was simple. We remember. Word spread fast. Galnet forums lit up with panic. News anchors from 20 different species tried to explain our tactics, our weapons, our silence. They couldn't. Because we weren't using any of the systems they knew. No mass fleets, no grand invasions, no live-streamed declarations or chest-beating speeches, no flag-raising or anthem playing. Just clean, deliberate destruction. 1 colony at a time. The Trek responded the only way they knew, by retaliating. They sent a cruiser to intercept our returning ship. We were in cryo when they caught us. That should have been the end. Their cruiser outgunned our stealth transport 20-1, but they didn't count on Durek's contingency. Every stealth transport carried a worm, not a literal one, a code. The moment an enemy signal made contact with our ship, the worm activated. It injected itself into the Trek cruiser's communication protocols, then burrowed into its internal systems. By the time their boarding party entered our cryo chamber, their cruiser was already rerouted. It took their own ship 11 minutes to destroy itself from the inside out. We woke up in a debris field, orbiting a broken moon, surrounded by the frozen corpses of our would-be captors. I remember staring out the viewport at the drifting remains. I didn't feel pride. I didn't feel rage. I just felt ready. This was just the beginning. They thought we'd be like the other species, that we'd launch a war of conquest, build empires, establish human-run colonies, and demand subservience. That was never the plan. Humans don't want to rule. We want to be left alone. But if you wake us up, if you force us to come back into the light, We don't conquer. We burn. The second wave hit the Escher Collective's starport near Vega. A human drone fleet, unmanned, untraceable, slammed into their orbital yards, disabling 6 cruisers and crippling their main AI core. No human lives lost. Thousands of Escher dead. They accused us of war crimes. We didn't respond. Because if you're still using words, you're not ready for the war we're bringing. They called for diplomacy. Of course they did. The Galactic Assembly tried to stage a ceasefire summit in the neutral zone on Zenth Prime. Over 40 ambassadors from every known race showed up. Even the Escher, despite the bloodbath. Even the Trek, still dragging behind from the moon strike. They lit candles. They wore robes. They played old recordings of the original armistice speech like it meant something anymore. They left a chair for the human representative. We never showed. But something did. The summit building collapsed mid-ceremony. No explosive, no ship. Just a sudden gravitational implosion. Pinpoint-focused, like a black hole sneezing inside the hall. No survivors, no message. Just the chair, untouched in the wreckage. They stopped asking for talks after that. I remember the briefing before Operation Black Seed. Durek stood before us, older than most, half machine from the war that gave him his reputation. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight, gravity. "There will be no peace this time," he said, pacing slowly. "You understand that, don't you?" We nodded. We gave them a second chance. 3,000 years of silence. We built gardens out of our graves. We gave them the illusion of safety. He stopped in front of me. "And now they think we're cruel. They think we're monsters. What do you think we are?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He smiled faintly. "Good. Because the truth is, we're not monsters. We're just efficient." He turned away, voice cold. "And when this is over, there won't be enough left of them to even write it down." That night, I stood alone on the outer deck of our cruiser, watching the stars through the reinforced glass. I thought of the stories we were told as kids, about peace, about unity, about the galaxy finally coming together after centuries of blood. They were lies. The truth was simpler. They feared us. Then they forgot why. And now we're here to remind them. 3,000 years of silence was long enough for the galaxy to forget the smell of burning cities. They remembered statistics, memorials, peace treaties signed on diplomatic vessels orbiting dead planets. But they forgot what it was like to fear. They forgot what it was like to see Earth angry, and that was the galaxy's final mistake. They thought we were gone. No, we were waiting. The operation called Black Seed wasn't a battle plan. It was a reintroduction, a statement, a reminder that silence isn't peace. It's preparation. And we had prepared perfectly. The mission was simple. Not to destroy, not to invade, but to leave a mark so deep it would live in the genetic memory of our enemies for generations. Durek assigned me to lead the op, not because I was the best. I wasn't. V-42 could kill faster. V-44 had better tactical vision. V-45 was a demolitions artist, so good he could collapse a bunker by humming near it. But I had something else. I remembered everything. I still had the name of my great-grandfather burned into my skin. A man who died not in combat, but in one of the peace camps run by the Escher Collective, back when they were purging Earth's gene line under the guise of biological equilibrium. Peace was just another name for their genocide. I didn't want medals. I wanted them to remember us properly. Not as diplomats, not as traitors, not as one of the many species struggling to survive in the galactic ecosystem. I wanted them to remember why they signed the armistice in the first place. Black Seed's target was the archive city of Halris, located in deep Escher territory, one of the few places untouched by war. A protected site, neutral by ancient galactic law. That law was dead. They kept records there, entire living libraries of digital thought, histories, genetic memory banks, species archives, and diplomatic lineage trees. It wasn't a military target, not directly, which made it perfect. Because wars aren't just about who dies, they're about what gets remembered. We went in through the underground aquifers. V42 and V44 breached through the water vents beneath the structure, while I and V43 infiltrated via a zero-grav lift shaft from a maintenance ring a kilometer out. No alarms. No resistance. We moved like shadows. Not a single bullet fired. Not a single body left behind. Halris was beautiful in a sterile, artificial way. Long corridors of glass and living metal. Floating archivists, synthetic minds, barely sentient, tasked with preserving the culture of over 300 species. One of them drifted by as I planted the charge beneath the main data stem. It paused, its voice soft and oddly human. "Are you here to contribute to memory or take from it?" I looked up. "I'm here to remind it what fear feels like." Then I detonated the seed. We didn't use fire. Fire was too kind. We used a custom-engineered neurological virus called Ember. Not for people, for data. It infected the records, altered genetic repositories, deleted historical truths, and rewrote galactic memory in silence. One by one, archives blinked out. They didn't just lose their history, they lost themselves. Whole species would wake up the next day with nothing. No proof of birth, no ancestral path, no cultural anchor, no political legitimacy, no historical leverage. Just blank pages where their empires used to be, and in their place, we left ours. We embedded just one memory in every system we erased. The sight of a human man, standing in a burned field, smiling with blood on his hands. They'd remember us, not as victims, as the monsters they made. The fallout was instant. Escher leadership collapsed in on itself within hours. Rival species accused them of fabricating their own destruction. Mass panic swept across their colonies. False histories began to surface. Political leaders found themselves erased from records. Entire governments retroactively invalidated. Civil wars ignited before any weapon was fired. We didn't kill them. We just made them forget who they were. It was beautiful. And it was only the beginning. When I got back to Ridgepoint Station, Durek met me on the docking platform. He looked older. He always did. Maybe it wasn't the years. Maybe it was the weight of remembering what so many others tried to forget. He didn't speak for a long time. Just stared at me as the heat from my dropship hissed into the void. Finally, he said, "You rewrote the future." I didn't know if it was approval or disappointment, so I asked him, "Do you regret it?" He laughed, short and broken. "Regret's a luxury for people who had a choice." He turned and walked. I followed. We didn't have homes anymore. Earth still existed, of course, but not as a planet. It was a fortress now, a sealed world behind orbital defense rings and magnetic lattice walls. No one got in. Not even us. It had become symbolic, the heart of the armistice, the last place our enemies saw before the bombs stopped falling. They were terrified of Earth. But they never bombed it again. Not because they couldn't, because of the last message they ever received from our capital. Just one phrase, broadcast across every open galactic channel. "If you strike us, we will not respond. We will erase your stars from the sky." They believed it. They should have, because they did strike once, long ago. And now the stars were starting to disappear. In my quarters, I kept an old piece of tech, a relic, a playback chip from before the armistice. It contained a single recording, a speech, my great-grandfather's voice, smuggled out of the peace camp moments before the Escher guards burned it to the ground. "We are not here to beg. We are not here to cry. We are here to bury our dead. and when the stars align, to let the galaxy feel what it means to truly be remembered. I listened to it every night before a mission. I wasn't a hero, I wasn't a soldier, I was just a man with too many ghosts and too good a memory. Not all humans agreed with the war. There were those who wanted to rebuild, who wanted peace. But they didn't speak loud. Not anymore. Because for every colony we lost, every child who died in orbit, every family line that vanished into the vacuum, there had to be a price. And if the galaxy wouldn't name it, we would. Durek's next assignment came down without a word. Just a coordinates drop and a brief line of instruction. They remember now, time to make them never forget. Our next target wasn't military. It was sacred. A temple moon called Yatora, orbiting a dead star, untouched by war for 5,000 years, shared territory, galactic holy ground. Pilgrims of every species traveled there, including humans. Once, it was where they signed the original armistice. Now it was where we'd end its memory for good. We didn't bomb it. We lifted it. Every nanotech drone we'd developed over the last 3 millennia converged on the moon's crust. Like ants eating the bones of a corpse, they dismantled it, atom by atom, until it was no longer a moon, no longer sacred, just dust floating where history used to be. The galaxy screamed. Religious factions declared holy war, political unions shattered, alliances folded overnight. No one trusted anyone anymore. And through it all, we stayed silent, watching, smiling. There's a difference between exile and self-isolation. The galaxy told itself that Earth went into hiding after the armistice, licking its wounds like a wounded animal. They convinced themselves we were afraid of them, that we were shamed by what we'd done in the Great Collapse, that we'd left because we couldn't take the guilt. Let them believe that. Let them dream. Because the truth about Earth wasn't exile. It was containment, but not for our protection. For theirs. It started centuries ago, while the armistice was still fresh, while the rest of the galaxy tried to pretend they hadn't nearly wiped out an entire species and called it peace. While they celebrated their diplomatic victory, humanity did what it always does when backed into a corner. We adapted. We built walls. Not the kind you see, the kind you feel. By the end of the first century of silence, Earth was no longer a planet. It was a code. A living weapon behind a firewall of satellites, energy veils, AI-controlled defense grids, and orbital fortresses. Nothing came in. Nothing got out. We called it the lock, and only one man held the keys. Durek. When I was summoned, it wasn't by request. It was a summons. Non-negotiable. A direct priority override tagged in red. Return to origin. Every human operative in the galaxy knew what it meant. It meant Earth was calling you home. Whether for punishment, promotion, or purpose, you didn't say no, you returned. My ship, the Vulture's Blade, dropped out of jump space near Jupiter. We didn't head straight to Earth. That would be suicide. You had to wait, float in the approved orbit until the lock decided you were real. 1,000,000 tests began the moment we entered the zone. Biological verification, neurological scans, memory sweeps. They made sure you were who you said you were. Because after 3,000 years, it wasn't just aliens who wanted to get into Earth. There were humans who'd forgotten what it meant to earn it. I was cleared after 2 days. That was fast. Probably because of Durek. Or maybe because the lock wanted me back. The transport that took me through the final approach was empty, black, silent. No windows. Just a seat. One single seat. You don't get to see Earth from above anymore. They don't want you to look down and feel pride. They want you to feel humility, to remember that your home is a privilege, not a birthright. The door opened into shadow. Not darkness, calculated low light. Everything inside the fortress was designed to preserve power, reduce noise, and keep attention low. The walls breathed, literally. Carbon-adaptive walls that absorbed vibration, sound, heat, memory. Every step was a whisper. Durek met me at the threshold. No words, just a nod. He led me through a hallway that didn't exist. Not on any map, not in any schematic. And then, we reached it. The core. The room that controlled the lock. The room where Earth watched the stars. It was huge, circular, every inch covered in transparent screen, showing live feeds from across the galaxy, battles, protests, Escher funeral processions, Trek news feeds, artificial suns being swallowed by our drones, and in the center, a platform. On it, a single chair, ancient, wooden, carved by hand. No one sat in it. No one had to. Durek stood beside it, his voice low. They've begun the Unity Protocol. I frowned. That's not possible. It is when they realize we're not going to stop. The Unity Protocol was their last resort, a galaxy-wide merger of military power, former enemies becoming allies, Trek and Escher, Yura and Drenak, all working together to forge a weapon strong enough to match the human threat. It was a panic response. I smirked. So they're scared. Durek didn't smile. No, they're desperate, and desperation makes creatures dangerous, even smart ones. He stepped forward and looked me dead in the eyes. They think we're fractured. They think you're the key to proving that. That's when I understood. Blackseed wasn't the mission. I was. They didn't just want to cripple the enemy's memory. They wanted to test mine. See if I'd flinch, see if the blood on my hands would rot my conscience. It hadn't. But that meant something else. I was now the symbol of what they feared most. A human without remorse, a weapon without hesitation. I didn't know whether to feel honored or cursed. Durek walked me deeper into the core. The next chamber was filled with preserved things, artifacts, relics, trophies, a twisted archive of the Armistice Age, and in the center, floating in containment, the last living Trek ambassador from the original peace accord. Alive, kept in stasis. A relic of lies. Durek gestured to him. We kept him for leverage, thought maybe we'd use him if the war came again. I stared through the glass. The ambassador's face was old, frilled, dried out like a husk. His eyes blinked slowly. He saw me. He knew. But now, Durek said, we don't need leverage. We just need a message. I didn't hesitate. I walked forward and placed my palm on the kill pad. A hiss, a flicker. The containment pod depressurized in under 4 seconds. His body crumpled inward, skin folding like paper in a vacuum. No scream, no struggle, just silence. Durek nodded. They'll know. We left his neural tags intact. The death signal's already spreading. I turned away. What's the next move? The next move was Earth itself. The galaxy assumed Earth was untouchable. They were right, but they thought we were hiding behind it like cowards. They didn't understand. Earth wasn't our sanctuary. It was our fuse, and now it was time to light it. The plan was called Ashwake. No one said it aloud. It lived only in coded fragments, and it was only activated if 3 criteria were met. 1. Galactic forces unify into a single front. 2. They bring war to Earth's doorstep. 3. Humanity no longer cares about being forgiven. All 3 had happened. The Unity fleet had mobilized. Over 1,000 warships, flagged from 17 species, moving toward Earth. Slowly, cautiously, still thinking maybe we'd blink. We wouldn't. Durek sent me to the outer wall, a structure that circled the Earth like a ring of knives. Each shard of it held technology the galaxy had never seen. Some of it wasn't even human. Because in our silence, we'd evolved. We didn't just survive, we outgrew the galaxy. The galaxy saw us as the past. But Earth Earth had become something else, something future. I walked the wall alone. Each step felt like stepping across time. Statues lined the corridor, soldiers, scientists, children, names carved beneath them, millions of names. All the ones we lost, all the ones we buried. I stopped at one. My brother's. He died on Europa, defending a civilian shuttle from a pirate raid 200 years ago. He wasn't a soldier, just a mechanic. But when the pirates broke in, he locked the engine room and overcharged the core. Killed them all, including himself. That's who humanity is. We don't win by being better. We win by being willing. When I returned to the core, Durek was already connected to the planetary relay. The screen showed the Unity fleet now 3 hours from the edge of Earth's defense zone. He looked at me. "Final chance," he said. "You tell me no, I shut it down, we fall back. We go quiet again." I shook my head. "No more hiding." He stared for a long moment, then activated the link. "Unity Fleet, this is Earth Command. You have violated sovereign space and engaged in hostile mobilization. This is your only warning. Turn back now, or be treated as enemy combatants. You have 10 seconds to comply." The fleet's response came quick. "Earth Command, this is Admiral Kalish of the Galactic Unity. Your threat is received and recorded. We do not fear extinction. Surrender now or face annihilation." I smiled coldly. "You don't fear extinction, but you should fear memory." Durek gave the signal. 10 seconds later, the stars began to vanish. One by one, the Unity Fleet's warships disappeared, not with explosions, not with screams. They were unwritten, reversed, rewound, deleted. Ashwake wasn't a weapon. It was a reset. A system designed to wipe not just matter, but history. Because in the end, we understood the galaxy's weakness. Not biology, not weaponry, not ships. Time. And now, time belonged to us. They never stood a chance. Not because we had more ships. We didn't. Not because we had more numbers. We were outnumbered 100 to 1. Not even because we had better technology. Though, after 3,000 years in the dark, we damn well did. No. They lost because they came to fight a war. And we didn't bring one. We brought erasure. The Unity Fleet was gone. In seconds. Wiped off the galactic map. No debris, no wreckage, no black box signals. Nothing but empty space where 1,000 warships had floated seconds before. And not just their ships. Their memory of it vanished too. Species across the galaxy woke up to a sudden hole in their timelines. No logs, no alerts. They couldn't remember why they'd mobilized. Couldn't remember where their best admirals had gone. Couldn't remember the name of the battle they were preparing to win. Some panicked. Others denied it ever happened. The Escher called it a glitch in the neural stream. The Trek blamed a rogue AI. The Drenak accused one another of sabotage. All lies, all desperate, because no one could admit the truth. Humanity was rewriting reality. Inside Earth's core command, I stood beside Durek as the last of the feeds cut to static. Ashwake had worked flawlessly. Every ship that passed into the lock's perimeter was now trapped in a suspended state, buried in fragmented time loops, erased from living memory but still technically alive. Somewhere, nowhere, always. Durek didn't speak for a long time. Then he said something I didn't expect. "We've gone too far," I turned. "You think that now?" He looked at me, and for the first time in decades, I saw the exhaustion behind his eyes. They don't even know what they've lost, what we took. How could they fight back? He wasn't asking for permission to stop. He was wondering if it mattered anymore. That's the cost of this kind of war. We weren't conquering. We were deconstructing, erasing names from history, planets from star maps, bloodlines from memory cores. And the galaxy? It was losing its mind. News feeds turned schizophrenic. Memories conflicted across species. Entire governments fell when they couldn't remember their own elections. One civilization, the Ura Mindborn, imploded completely. Their mental network collapsed after its central knowledge sphere went blank overnight. They tore each other apart, blaming internal corruption. They never knew it was us. We didn't need to lift a finger. Their own minds would do it for us. But even then, even when the galaxy trembled, a few tried to fight. A few remembered. There was one species, older than even our oldest records, the Verasi. They didn't keep data in machines. They used genetic memory, etched into their bone marrow, passed down like scars. Ashwake didn't touch them. They remembered everything, and they hated us for it. We first noticed their interference on the fringe colonies, places we hadn't struck yet. They didn't send armies. They sent prophets, Verasi memory bearers, tall, skeletal creatures that spoke in harmonic pulses. They would land in silence, touch the ground, and every sentient mind in the vicinity would remember a version of events, fabricated, rewritten, but believable. In their memories, we were the monsters. Earth was a myth, and the armistice had never happened. It was brilliant. They were trying to outplay us at our own game, not just by remembering the past, but by changing it before we could erase it. Durek knew the threat immediately. If they spread that memory, the galaxy might rally again. So we gave them a new job. I was assigned to a new squad, V5 Null, a ghost unit. We weren't assassins. We were editors. Wherever the Verasi spread their memory, we followed, and we deleted it. Not just them, not just the people who heard them. We deleted everything that touched their rewritten story. Whole towns, ships, family lines. I remember a girl, maybe 13, maybe less, staring at me while her village burned behind her. Her mind still held the lie. The Verasi lie. I told myself it wasn't her fault. Then I shot her. No hesitation. Not because I wanted to, because she would have spread it. After the third operation, I stopped speaking to the others, even the ones who didn't mind the blood, because something inside me had started to ask a question I couldn't ignore. What if we were becoming the lie? What if the monsters the Verasi painted in their rewritten histories weren't made up? What if we were already them? I didn't voice it, not to Durek, not to the unit. But I knew he felt it too. He just carried it differently, in his silence, in his fatigue, in the way he didn't watch the executions anymore. Maybe he was counting down the days until someone erased us. We discovered the Verasi base on a dead moon orbiting a collapsed neutron star. They'd been transmitting encrypted memories using biological spores, carried through solar winds, infecting nearby species, embedding rewritten history into living tissue. It was genius, and it had to die. We infiltrated through the magnetic fields, cloaked, no resistance. Inside the caves, we found memory clusters, half-living, pulsating, full of stolen faces and invented tragedies. They showed Earth as a burning tyrant, our soldiers as demons, mothers torn from their children, planets shattered for sport, laughing human commanders watching the galaxy bleed. The worst part? It wasn't entirely false, just reassembled. Truths twisted into knives, real events bent just enough to cut. We torched it, all of it, burned the clusters, killed the bearers, bleached the air, nothing left but ash and echoes. But as we left, one of them, old, wounded, dying, locked eyes with me. He didn't beg, he didn't curse, he just said, in that pulsing, hollow voice, "You can kill memory, but you can't kill meaning." And then he died. That night I stood alone outside the transport bay, helmet off, letting the cold bite my face. I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt numb. The stars above were quiet. Too quiet. I thought of my brother, my father, my people. Would anyone remember them? Would anyone remember me? Or would we all vanish into the same fog we unleashed on others? Back on Earth, Durek met me at the gate. He didn't speak, just handed me a chip. We intercepted this. I slotted it into my neural reader. A child's drawing, scanned from a refugee camp on a fringe world. It showed a smiling Earth. Not burning, not evil, just watching. Silent. Beneath it, a child had written, "The humans will come, and they'll take everything. But I'm glad, because we took from them first." I looked at Durek. "Do they understand us now?" He shook his head. "No, but they understand why. They thought we were trying to win a war, but you don't win a war when no one remembers the score. You don't conquer when the map keeps erasing itself. You don't negotiate when your enemy no longer has a name." And that was the point. But when you start tearing away everything, memories, people, culture, history, eventually there's nothing left to burn but yourself. Earth had gone quiet. Not silent like before, when the stars whispered about our absence. This was different. This was a heavy quiet, a kind that listened, like something deep beneath the crust had started breathing and didn't want to be interrupted. I felt it the moment I stepped into the cradle, the underground heart of Earth, where the old codes were written and buried. Durek brought me there without explanation. Just said, "You need to see it." So I followed him down. Through corridors that hadn't been walked in centuries. Through blast doors sealed in languages no longer spoken. Through the narrow throat of Earth's last secret. The cradle wasn't beautiful. It was ugly in a sacred kind of way. Raw steel, cracked stone, walls lined with bone memory tech that hummed like it was dreaming. And in the center, resting in a containment cradle of frozen light, was the child. That's what they called her. Not because she was young. She wasn't. She looked maybe 18, maybe older, but she was grown wrong, engineered, designed, sculpted out of DNA and grief and vengeance. Durek said nothing as we stood before her. I stared. She didn't move. Didn't blink. But I could feel her watching me. Every inch of my skin burned like I was being judged by something older than law. "Who is she?" I asked. Durek's voice was flat. "She's what's left," I frowned. "Of what?" "Of us." The child, codenamed Silence, was the final project of Earth's core AI, built in the 2nd century of the Armistice, born from the genetic data of every soldier who died in the Great Collapse, every scientist who vanished in the Purge, every child erased in the first waves. She wasn't a clone. She was a memory made flesh. And she had one purpose. Durek looked at me. When we activated Ashwake, we tripped the contingency. I turned to him, slowly. "The Omega Protocol." He nodded. "She's the end game. If we fail, if Earth falls. If we are compromised, she activates." I stared at her, at the stillness, the emptiness in her eyes. "What does she do?" Durek didn't blink. "She becomes the only human left." It wasn't a failsafe. It was a restart. If we lost, if the galaxy finally outmatched us, outnumbered us, outlasted us, then Earth wouldn't leave behind ruins or heroes or flags. It would leave behind one perfect survivor, genetically encoded to remember everything, not as a story, but as a weapon. Silence wouldn't rebuild civilization. She'd end it. One star at a time. I didn't speak on the way back up. What could I say? We weren't just playing God anymore. We were preparing to replace ourselves with one, and it was starting to feel less like strategy, and more like suicide. The galaxy wasn't quiet anymore, not since the Verassi incident. Someone, no one knew who, leaked footage of their stasis tombs, human operatives torching memory vaults, executions, Ashwake tech vaporizing identity cores. It spread like a virus, and the species who once stood silent now began to scream, not at us, but at each other. The Drenak accused the Escher of selling them out. The Trek executed half their diplomatic council in panic. Smaller species began to riot, claiming humanity had infiltrated their leadership, rewriting policies from the inside. Even the Galactic Assembly fell apart. One by one, delegates disappeared. Some erased, others simply broke. Couldn't tell who they were, couldn't remember what side they were on. Some killed themselves, others were never found. But not all resistance died with memory. There was one last move we didn't expect. They built a weapon. Not a ship, not a gun, not another AI. They built a mirror. The Verasi, before we wiped their core, seeded a protocol into Allied minds, buried beneath normal thought, designed to activate when enough memory gaps aligned. It was a memory virus. It didn't attack systems. It didn't rewrite facts, it reminded. And when it hit critical mass, species across the galaxy suddenly remembered everything. The war, the armistice, the betrayal, the silence, the executions, and the pain we caused. It spread like wildfire, infecting minds, reactivating trauma, syncing with their core neural biology like it had always been there. They remembered the truth. Not our truth. Theirs. I got the alert in the middle of a zero-grav debrief. Every screen across the outpost flickered. And then, names. Names of their dead. Thousands. Millions. Voices screaming in languages long deleted. Images of Earth's ships executing unarmed diplomats, human soldiers walking through burning colonies, children screaming beneath white-hot sky bursts. It wasn't false. It wasn't twisted. It was real. The truth we buried. Operatives began to falter. Some refused missions. Others froze during deployments. One turned his weapon on his own squad and whispered, "We are the virus now," before pulling the trigger. I sat alone in the mess hall, watching the feed loop over and over. Durek entered quietly. He sat beside me. "They've started remembering?" I nodded. "Are we still winning?" He looked tired. "If memory is the battlefield, we've lost control of the terrain. Ashwake was supposed to be permanent. But memory is a living thing. You can't just erase pain. You have to replace it with something stronger. We didn't. All we left behind was fear, and now they were turning it into fire. We received word 2 hours later, Unity reborn. A new fleet, smaller but unified. And this time they weren't coming to fight Earth. They were coming to talk, to surrender, some said, to beg, others hoped. But Durek knew better. He stood before the council, what was left of it, and spoke 3 words that froze every bloodline in the room. They want silence. They didn't want victory. They wanted insurance, a way to keep Earth from ever using her, a way to put the weapon back in the box, maybe even to raise her themselves, turn the last human into a galactic asset, a tool of peace. They were offering terms: peace, forgiveness, reintegration, and all we had to do was give them our last memory. Durek turned to me that night, handed me the kill switch. "One push, and she never wakes up." He didn't tell me what to do. He didn't have to. This war had never been about orders. It was about what we were willing to become. I didn't sleep. I sat in the chamber, watching her breathe beneath the light. She looked like a girl. But I knew what she really was. She was our sin made flesh. If I let her wake, she'd destroy them all. If I ended her, we'd finally be alone, empty, clean. Maybe that was the point. But just before dawn, she opened her eyes. Not because of the kill switch, not because of any signal, just because she knew. She looked at me, and in a voice that wasn't a voice, she asked one question. "Do you want to be remembered or forgiven?" I didn't have an answer. Still don't. She stood in the light, not blinking, not moving, barefoot on the cold steel, her white hospital-like robe clinging to her too thin frame. The containment chamber had released her the moment she opened her eyes. No codes entered, no commands spoken. She simply woke up, and the world changed. I couldn't explain it, but I felt it. The room felt heavier, not like gravity, more like consequence. "Silence," I said. "Do you know who you are?" She didn't answer with words. Her head tilted slightly, and her eyes, those unnatural silver irises, watched me like I was something to be studied. Then she spoke. Not like a girl, not like a child, like 1,000 voices whispering at once from beneath the skin of reality. "I am the last truth." I stepped back, not in fear, in understanding. She wasn't here to be loved. She wasn't born to lead. She was built to remember everything we'd destroyed, everything we'd erased, every moment of agony we refused to carry. She was our reckoning. Durek arrived minutes later. One look at her, and I saw the regret hit him like a hammer. He didn't bow, didn't salute. Just stood there, hands clenched behind his back. She turned to him, and I swear, for a second, her face softened. Not like a daughter seeing her father, but like a knife recognizing its maker. "They want her," I said. "Unity reborn. They're offering peace, a seat at the table, a future." Durek didn't look away from her. "They don't want peace. They want to rewrite her before she rewrites them." He was right. If they got her, she'd become another symbol, another tool of diplomacy. Her memory, her raw, perfect archive, would be stripped, twisted, packaged for history books, and everything we did would be rebranded as a tragic misunderstanding. The wars, the silence, the vengeance, the fire, all reduced to footnotes in a galaxy desperate to feel good about itself again. "We have to decide," I said. Durek turned to me. "No, you have to." He held up the 2 keys, one black, one white. Black to activate her fully, white to neutralize her, forever. No one else has earned the right. I wanted to scream. I didn't ask for this. I didn't want to be the one to decide the fate of our species. I wasn't a general. I wasn't a philosopher. I was just a man with good memory and too much blood on his hands. But maybe that's why it had to be me. Because I remembered. Not just the war, but the weight of it. Silence stepped forward. Her voice, when she used only one this time, was soft. "Will you choose mercy? Because you want it? Or because you fear remembering why you don't deserve it?" That one hit like a railgun to the chest. I turned away, couldn't meet her gaze. Not yet. So I left the chamber. And I walked Earth. It was dawn on the African plate, what used to be the old continent. Now a terraforming hub and a garden built from pain. Every tree, every river, every stone placed where blood had been spilled. Memorials lined the hills, names etched in nanosteel, digital faces whispering stories to anyone who stopped to listen. And they listened. Even now, centuries later, humanity walked among its ghosts, not to mourn, but to remember. I found an old man feeding birds in a reconstructed ruin, a cathedral-like skeleton half sunk in the red soil. He didn't flinch when I approached. Just looked at me with eyes that had seen too much war to fear it anymore. "You came to ask if we deserve to survive," he said before I even spoke. I paused. He smiled bitterly. "They always come to me before they decide." "Decide what?" "If it's better to let us die as monsters," he tossed some crumbs, "or live as hypocrites." I sat with him. Didn't speak. Just watched the birds pick crumbs off the bones of history. Silence found me that night. She wasn't following me. She just appeared, like she was tied to every step I took. She sat beside me on the old stone bench, knees tucked to her chest like a child. Except she wasn't. Not anymore. Not ever. "I've seen it all," she whispered. I didn't answer. "I watched your ancestors burn galaxies, then cry for the dead." Still, I said nothing. "They weren't heroes," she said, "but they weren't cowards either." I nodded. "No, they were just human." And I finally asked her what I hadn't dared until then. "What will you do if I set you free?" Her head turned. "I will remember perfectly." "And then what?" "Then I will let the galaxy choose what to do with that truth." It wasn't an answer. It was a mirror. She wasn't vengeful. She wasn't merciful. She was exact. Pure, unfiltered memory. The war, the armistice, the silence, the fire. All of it. If she lived, the galaxy would see the truth. All of it. No twisting, no deletion, no narrative. Just raw history in its most brutal form. I returned to the core. Durek waited, silent. The two keys rested in my hands. White, mercy. Black, memory. One would bury the truth forever. The other would expose it to a galaxy still bleeding from what it remembered. I didn't flip a coin, didn't pray, didn't look at silence. I just listened. To the ghosts in my blood, to the burning children in orbit, to the forgotten heroes buried beneath time, to the billions we erased, to the billions who tried to erase us. And I made my choice. I chose black. The chamber pulsed once, just once, as the activation rippled through the system. Silence stood in the center, eyes closed, arms open, and then the world changed. She didn't scream, didn't rise into the air or explode into light. She just existed, and the stars bent around her. Every hidden file, every erased memory, every secret atrocity came rushing back. Not just to Earth, to the entire galaxy. It wasn't a broadcast, it was a resonance, a memory quake that shattered the silence we'd built and poured it, raw and bloody, into every living mind. I collapsed. The weight of it all, every name, every scream, every plea for mercy, ripped through me like fire. And I wept. Durek dropped to his knees. He didn't speak, didn't resist. He just let it come. And across the stars, it began. Aliens froze mid-sentence. Political leaders collapsed in sobs. Mothers held their children like they were about to be taken. Soldiers dropped weapons and begged invisible ghosts for forgiveness. Because now, they all remembered. Not just their pain. Ours too. The full picture. Some screamed for revenge, others for mercy. Some wanted to rebuild, others wanted to burn it all down. But the important part? They were all remembering the same story. At last. Silence stood at the center of it all, still and waiting, like a loaded gun on a table shared by enemies. And we were no longer in control. It began in a whisper, not a sound, there was none, not a broadcast. She didn't need one. But a pulse that moved like light across the void. Silence had awakened, and the galaxy would never sleep again. What happened next wasn't war. There were no battles, no ships moving into formation, no orders barked across starfields, no final stand, just the truth. Raw, unfiltered, eternal, memory as a weapon, and no one, not one species, had a shield strong enough to survive it. The Verassi were the first to fall, not to guns, not to fire, but to clarity. They prided themselves on knowledge, on memory. They believed history made them immortal, but when silence uncoiled her archive, when every moment they had forgotten came back, they shattered. They remembered the votes they cast, the children they condemned, the camps they funded, the genocide they justified with cold logic and philosophical detachment. They remembered human screams, and more terrifying than that, they remembered their own laughter in response. Some Verisi took their own lives in mass rituals. Others set their cities ablaze, hoping the fire would erase what silence had made eternal. The Escher followed soon after. Their colonies erupted in chaos. Youth blaming the elders blaming forgotten governments. In a single night, their Genetic Purity Council was executed by its own guards. The soldiers who pulled the trigger were crying. They didn't want to kill, but they remembered. Not rumors. Images. Flesh melting under sonic whips. Eyes pulled from children under compliance testing. Human skin turned into trophies. And worse, the policies that made it legal. Everywhere, species remembered what had been taken from us. But they also remembered what we'd taken in return. Human warships slicing through retreating fleets, entire systems erased, Ashwake eating memory and history alike, children erased before they could speak. We had become monsters, but they had made us, and now they all knew it. The galaxy fell into a silence even deeper than the one we had given it for 3,000 years. This silence was not made of fear. This silence was made of knowing. The silence after an argument you realize you lost centuries too late. The silence after a wound starts bleeding, and you know you won't stop it. The silence of staring at a mirror and seeing something inhuman looking back. On Earth, silence stood alone in the Hall of Ghosts. The digital walls around her flickered with the faces of every life lost in the war. Not just humans, all of them. Verasi, Escher, Drenak, Trek, Yura, human. She made no speech. She had no closing words. She just showed them, and they wept. There was no treaty, no vote, no announcement. But slowly, across the galaxy, weapons were deactivated. Fleets returned to their ports. No one ordered it. They just stopped. Because what was left to fight for? No one wanted to own the future anymore. They just wanted to survive the past. Humanity didn't celebrate. How could we? We hadn't won. There was no victory in this. Only exposure. Only the great, endless grief of knowing you were right. But knowing that rightness cost you everything. Durek died 2 weeks after activation. Collapsed quietly in his quarters. Heart failure. Some say he saw a vision in his final moments. That silence visited him and showed him something no one else had seen. A future where it all played out differently, where we forgave, where we never erased, where we let the pain breathe instead of burying it. He died with a small smile on his face. The first real one I'd ever seen from him. And me? I left Earth. Silence told me I could. That I had earned peace, but I didn't go far. I stayed just past the reach of the lock, orbiting in an old, rusting station above the Martian fringe. Watching. Listening. Sometimes alien diplomats come, not to negotiate, not to argue, but to confess. They sit across from me in the old steel room with flickering lights and broken coffee machines, and they tell me what they did during the Great Collapse, what their fathers did, what their species forgot, what they forgave themselves for too easily. They don't ask me for forgiveness. They just want someone who remembers. Silence is still active, not walking the galaxy, not ruling it, just being. She becomes whatever each world needs her to be, a child, a warrior, a teacher, a mirror. She never lies, she never edits, she never comforts, she simply shows, and that is enough. The galaxy, for the first time in its history, lives in peace, not out of love, not out of mutual respect, but out of a shared burden. A memory so vast and violent, no one dares to repeat it. There's a phrase that's begun circulating across the outer colonies. No one knows who said it first. But I hear it all the time now. In marketplaces. In quiet conversations, in the hush before diplomats speak. The humans smiled, and the stars were never the same again. I sometimes think about using the white key. It's still on my belt. Durek never took it back, a second chance, a clean slate. But every time I reach for it, I remember the girl on Europa Station, bones charred under a fallen ceiling, the little boy in orbit over Saturn, eyes wide as the airlock opened. My brother, holding a wrench like a weapon, knowing he wouldn't survive the detonation. They didn't get to forget. Why should I? The future isn't bright, but it's honest. And maybe that's better. Maybe that's what we needed all along. Not forgiveness, just the courage to remember together. So that's how it ends. Not with the scream of engines, not with the flash of weapons, but with one girl standing in silence while the galaxy finally listens. The stars burned cold and indifferent above the fleet of the Ascendants, their shimmering hulls cutting through the void like blades of divine light. They called themselves gods, and for millennia, no one had dared to disagree. Their empire spanned galaxies, their will enforced by ships that could crack planets open like eggshells, their voices echoing through subspace as if the universe itself knelt to listen. They were beautiful, flawless, eternal, or so they thought. That was before the Erebus arrived. It started with a ripple, a faint distortion in the fabric of space that their sensors barely registered. The Ascendant Fleet, 5 majestic dreadnoughts, each a monument to their supremacy, hovered above the ruined husk of Kylara, a backwater world they'd reduced to ash for daring to defy their tithe. The airwaves still crackled with the last screams of its people, a sound the Ascendants savored like music. High Lord Zeresh stood on the bridge of the light of divinity, his silver eyes glowing faintly as he surveyed the smoldering wreckage below. His voice, smooth as silk and sharp as a blade, broke the silence. "Let this be a lesson," he said, his words broadcast to every ship in the fleet. "Defiance is a privilege mortals cannot afford." The crew murmured their agreement, their faces serene, their minds untroubled by the slaughter. To them, this was justice, the natural order of a universe shaped by their hands. They were beyond guilt, beyond doubt, until the ripple became a tear, and the tear became a shadow. It emerged without warning, a silhouette so vast it blotted out the stars behind it. The Erebus didn't glide into view like the Ascendant ships. It erupted, a jagged wound in reality, its hull a patchwork of black steel and glowing red scars that pulsed like veins. It was ugly, brutish, a thing forged in fire and hate rather than crafted with elegance. The Ascendants stared, their perfect composure faltering for the first time in centuries. This was no ship of theirs. This was something else, something wrong. "What is it?" Zeresh demanded, his voice losing its velvet edge as he turned to his sensor officer. The officer's fingers danced over the controls, his brow furrowing as the data streamed in. "Unknown origin," he replied, his tone clipped. "No match in our archives. It's massive, larger than anything we've encountered, and it's powering weapons." Zaresh's lips curled into a sneer. Primitive, no doubt. Some forgotten race crawling out of the dirt to challenge us. Destroy it. The order was given, and the light of divinity hummed with energy as its cannons locked onto the intruder. Beams of searing white light lanced through the void, each one capable of vaporizing a moon. The crew watched, expecting the shadow to erupt in a satisfying burst of debris. Instead, the beams struck and vanished. No explosion, no damage, just a faint shimmer across the Erebus's hull, as if it had swallowed the attack whole. A murmur of unease rippled through the bridge. Zaresh's sneer faded, replaced by a flicker of something he hadn't felt in eons. Uncertainty. Before he could speak, the Erebus responded. It didn't fire beams or missiles. It roared. A sound that wasn't sound. A wave of raw, primal fury that slammed into the Ascendant fleet like a physical blow. Subspace screamed with it, a cacophony of rage and defiance that drowned out their systems and set their ships trembling. On the bridge, officers clutched their ears, blood trickling from their noses as the noise tore through their minds. Zaresh staggered, his silver eyes wide, his perfect mask shattered. And then the voice came. "You call yourselves gods," it boomed, low and guttural, resonating through every deck of every ship. It wasn't a transmission, it was a violation, a presence that clawed its way into their skulls. "Look upon us and no despair." The Erebus surged forward, its engines igniting with a red glare that bathed Kailara's ruins in a hellish light. Up close, its hull revealed more than scars. It was etched with names, thousands of them carved in jagged, uneven lines. Names of worlds, of people, of civilizations long erased by the Ascendant's wrath. This wasn't just a ship, it was a monument to their sins, a reckoning given form. Zaresh forced himself upright, his hands trembling as he gripped the command console. "Fire everything," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Erase it from existence." The fleet obeyed, unleashing a storm of light and plasma that lit the void like a second sun. The Erebus took it all, every shot, every blast, its hull glowing hotter but never breaking. And then it fired back. A single lance of crimson energy erupted from its bow, slicing through the radiant spear, the smallest of the dreadnoughts, like a knife through paper. The ship didn't explode, it unraveled, its pristine hull peeling apart in slow, grotesque tendrils before collapsing into a cloud of dust. The Ascendants watched in silence, their godlike certainty crumbling as the debris drifted past their view screens. On the light of divinity, Zaresh's breath came in shallow gasps. What are they?" he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. The answer came not from his crew, but from the Erebus. Its voice returned, colder now, laced with a bitter satisfaction. "We are the ones you forgot, the ones you burned, the ones you called weak." A pause, heavy with menace. "We are human." The word hung in the air, unfamiliar to most of the Ascendants. A myth, a footnote, a species erased so long ago it barely lingered in their oldest records. Yet here they were, not just alive, but angry, their worship a blade forged from the ashes of their past. Zaresh's mind raced, searching for a response, a plan, anything to reclaim control. But the Erebus didn't wait. It charged, its engines flaring as it bore down on the fleet. The Ascendants, for all their power, felt something they'd never known. Fear. They had called themselves gods, but gods don't bleed. And as the Erebus closed in, they began to realize they might. The Erebus didn't slow as it tore through the void, a juggernaut of wrath aimed straight at the Ascendant fleet. On the light of divinity, chaos erupted. Officers shouted over one another, their voices shrill with panic as the human warship closed the distance. Zaresh gripped the edge of his console, his silver eyes locked on the view screen, watching the red glow of the Erebus's engines grow brighter. The air tasted of metal and fear, a sensation so alien to him that it burned. "Shields to maximum," he barked, forcing his voice steady. "Redirect power from the secondary systems, everything to the cannons." The crew scrambled to obey, their movements jerky, their flawless coordination unraveling. The Erebus loomed larger now, its scarred hull filling the screen, those carved names glaring like accusations. Zaresh's mind churned. Humans, they'd said. A dead race, a trivial footnote. How could they wield something like this? How could they dare? The fleet fired again, a desperate barrage of light and energy that streaked across the void. The Erebus didn't flinch. Its hull shimmered, absorbing the onslaught, the red veins pulsing faster as if feeding on their attacks. Then it struck back, not with a single beam this time, but with a wave A wall of crimson energy surged from its bow, slamming into the celestial wrath with a force that shook the stars. The dreadnought buckled, its elegant spires snapping like dry twigs before it imploded, a silent scream of light and debris. Zaresh's breath caught. 2 ships gone in minutes. His fleet, his invincible armada, was bleeding. "Evasive maneuvers!" he roared. But the Erebus was already moving, faster than anything that size should be. It pivoted with brutal precision, targeting the Eternal Grace. Missiles launched from its flanks, not sleek or refined, but crude, jagged things that screamed through space and detonated in bursts of molten shrapnel. The Grace's shields flared, then failed, and the ship tore apart in a cascade of fire. The voice came again, clawing into their minds. "You built your thrones on our graves." It was slower now, savoring each word. "Now watch them fall." Zaresh's hands shook. He'd never known defeat, never imagined it. But this was no battle. This was slaughter. "Who commands you?" he shouted into the void, his voice cracking. "Show yourself." The Erebus paused, its engines dimming, and for a moment, silence gripped the fleet. Then the viewscreen flickered, and a figure appeared. Human, unmistakably. Scarred, weathered, eyes like blackened steel. "I am Admiral Kane," he said, his voice a low growl, "and this is humanity's answer." The screen went dark, and the Erebus charged again, its shadow swallowing the stars. The Erebus didn't hesitate after Kane's words. It surged toward the light of divinity, its jagged hull a nightmare bearing down on Zaresh's flagship. The Ascendant fleet was down to 2 ships now, their pristine elegance marred by fear and faltering resolve. On the bridge, the air buzzed with static and desperation. Zaresh's officers worked frantically, rerouting power, recalibrating weapons, anything to hold the line. But their hands trembled, and their silver eyes darted to their High Lord, seeking the certainty he could no longer give. "Target its core," Zaresh snapped, his voice hoarse. "There must be a weakness. Find it." The light of divinity unleashed a torrent of plasma, streams of white-hot fury that slammed into the Erebus. For a fleeting moment, hope flickered as the human ship's hull flared under the assault. But the glow faded, and the Erebus kept coming, unscathed, relentless. A low rumble shook the deck, and the voice returned, searing through their minds. "Weakness? You taught us to have none." Kane's tone dripped with venom, a promise of retribution centuries in the making. The Erebus fired again, not energy this time, but something worse. Grappling harpoons launched from its sides, massive barbed claws that punched through the Sovereign Dawn's hull with a sickening crunch. The dreadnought lurched, tethered to the human ship like prey caught in a trap. Zaresh watched, horrified, as the Erebus reeled its catch closer. Cables tightened, and the Dawn's pristine surface buckled, splitting open as if gutted. Sparks and bodies spilled into the void, ascendants, immortal no longer. The crew on the light of divinity froze, their godlike poise shattered by the sight of their kin dying like mortals. "Cut the feed!" Zaresh shouted, but it was too late. The Erebus's next move came without warning. Ports along its flank opened, disgorging swarms of smaller craft. Fighters, ugly and angular, moving with a ferocity the Ascendants couldn't comprehend. They descended on the Dawn, tearing into its wounds, their weapons crude but devastating. Explosions bloomed across the dreadnought's frame, and within moments it was gone, reduced to a drifting husk. Zaresh's chest heaved, his mind reeling. 3 ships lost. 3! The humans weren't fighting a war. They were waging annihilation. "Full retreat," he whispered, the words tasting like ash. "Signal the Empire. We need reinforcements, now." The officer at the comms hesitated, his fingers hovering over the controls. "High Lord, the subspace channels, They're jammed. It's them. They've cut us off. A chill ran through Zeresh. Trapped. Alone. The Erebus loomed closer, its red scars pulsing like a heartbeat. Kain's voice returned, quieter now, almost intimate. No gods to save you. Just us. The light of divinity shuddered as the human ship locked onto it, and Zeresh realized with dawning terror. This was only the beginning. The light of divinity groaned under the strain as the Erebus closed in, its shadow swallowing the last vestiges of hope on the ascendant flagship. Zeresh stood rigid, his silver eyes reflecting the crimson glow seeping through the view screen. The bridge was a cacophony of alarms and shouted orders, but it all blurred into noise. His fleet, his pride, his proof of divinity, was gone, shredded by these humans, these ghosts from a past he'd never bothered to remember. Now, it was just him and the Erebus, and the weight of that truth crushed him. "Fire the reserves," he roared, slamming a fist onto the console. "Everything we have, hit them now!" The ship's cannons flared to life, spewing a desperate volley of energy that streaked toward the human warship. The Erebus didn't dodge or falter. It took the hits, its hull absorbing the barrage like a predator savoring a futile struggle. Then it retaliated. A pulse erupted from its core, not a weapon but a shockwave, a ripple of force that slammed into the light of divinity with the weight of a dying star. The ship lurched, its pristine decks splitting as bulkheads buckled. Officers screamed as they were thrown against walls, their bodies crumpling like paper. Zeresh clung to his station, blood trickling from his temple, his perfect form marred for the first time in centuries. Kain's voice clawed into his skull again, relentless. "You thought us broken. You thought us dust." The words carried a weight beyond anger. Grief, forged into something sharper. "We built this from your ruins." The Erebus surged closer, its harpoons firing once more. They struck the light of divinity's flank, piercing deep, and the ship shuddered as the cables tightened, dragging it toward the human behemoth. Zaresh's mind raced, searching for an escape, a miracle. "Divert power to the engines!" he shouted, his voice ragged. "Break free, now!" The engines flared, straining against the pull, but the Erebus held firm, its grip unyielding. Sparks flew as the hull began to tear, metal screeching in protest. Through the chaos, the viewscreen flickered, and Kain appeared again. His face was a map of scars, each line a story of loss and defiance. "You burned our worlds," he said, his voice low, steady. "You took our children, our homes, you called it order." He leaned closer, eyes blazing. "We call it war." The screen cut out, and the Erebus unleashed its fighters again. They swarmed the light of divinity, their weapons ripping into its defenses. Explosions rocked the bridge, and Zeresh fell to his knees, the taste of defeat bitter on his tongue. He'd called himself a god, but gods don't kneel. Yet here he was, broken as the humans, those he'd deemed beneath him, tore his world apart. The Erebus loomed, its scarred hull filling the void, and Zeresh knew his empire would hear of this, and it would tremble. The light of divinity trembled like a wounded animal, its once pristine hull now a jagged ruin of twisted metal and flickering lights. The Erebus held it fast, its harpoons embedded deep, cables taut as they reeled the ascendant flagship closer to its scarred maw. On the bridge, Zeresh pulled himself to his feet, his silver eyes dim with exhaustion and fury. Blood streaked his face, a crimson insult to his divine facade, and his hands shook as he gripped the shattered remnants of his command console. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid scent of burning circuits, the cries of his crew a distant echo beneath the relentless hum of the human warship. "Status," he barked, his voice raw, barely audible over the chaos. An officer, young, her pristine uniform torn, stumbled toward him, her face pale with terror. "Shields are down, High Lord," she stammered. "Engines at critical. We're losing her." Her words faltered as another explosion rocked the ship, sending a shower of sparks cascading from the ceiling. Zaresh's gaze snapped to the view screen, where the Erebus loomed, its red-veined hull pulsing like a living thing, a beast savoring its prey. He'd never known powerlessness. For millennia, he'd bent galaxies to his will, crushed rebellions with a whisper, watched worlds kneel at his feet. Now he was the one cornered, his empire's might reduced to this single, failing ship. And the humans, those vermin he'd dismissed as extinct, were the ones holding the blade. The irony gnawed at him, a bitter poison seeping into his bones. Kane's voice returned, cutting through the noise like a knife. "You hear it, don't you?" It rasped, low and deliberate, burrowing into Zaresh's mind. "The silence of your gods." The words carried a weight that made his chest tighten, a mockery laced with truth. Zaresh clenched his fists, nails digging into his palms as he glared at the screen. The human's scarred face flickered into view again, unyielding, his eyes burning with a fire Zaresh couldn't comprehend. "You're nothing," Zaresh spat, his voice trembling with defiance. "A shadow of a dead race, clinging to vengeance. You think this changes anything?" He forced a laugh, sharp and hollow, but it died in his throat as the Erebus responded. Not with words, but with action. A new weapon emerged from its hull, a massive cannon unfolding like a predator's jaw, its barrel glowing with a sickly green light. The air on the bridge grew heavy, the crew's breaths catching as the weapon charged. "High Lord, it's targeting us!" the officer cried, her voice breaking. "Energy readings are off the scale. We can't—" Her warning was cut short as the cannon fired. A beam of emerald energy lanced through the void, striking the light of Divinity's bow. The ship screamed, a sound of rending metal and fracturing hope, as the beam carved through its hull, slicing off a third of its length in a single, brutal stroke. The severed section drifted away, a lifeless husk spilling debris and bodies into the darkness. Zaresh staggered, the deck tilting beneath him. He caught himself against a railing, his vision swimming as the reality sank in. His ship, his sanctuary, was dying. The Erebus pressed its advantage, its fighters swarming the wound, their weapons tearing deeper into the flagship's guts. Explosions blossomed across the view screen, each one a dagger to Zaresh's pride. Kane's voice returned, softer now, almost pitying. "You took everything from us. Our homes, our future, our names." A pause, heavy with memory. "We took them back." The Erebus surged closer, its shadow engulfing the light of divinity, and Zaresh felt it, a chill that wasn't just fear, but something deeper, something primal. Regret. He'd burned their worlds, yes, he'd erased them from history, convinced they were beneath notice. But they hadn't forgotten. They'd built this monstrosity, this Erebus from the ashes he'd left behind, and now it was here, a mirror reflecting every sin he'd buried. The cannon charged again, its green glow casting an eerie light across the bridge, and Zaresh knew. This was no longer a battle. This was judgment. The Erebus fired, and the light of divinity shattered, its divine light snuffed out by the wrath of those it had forsaken. The light of divinity was no longer a ship. It was a carcass, its hull split open, bleeding fire and debris into the void. The bridge, once a gleaming testament to ascendant supremacy, was now a graveyard of shattered consoles and broken bodies. Zaresh clung to life amid the wreckage, his silver eyes clouded with dust and despair. The green beam from the Erebus had torn through the ship's heart, leaving it adrift, its engines silent, its crew reduced to whispers and moans. He crawled through the chaos, his pristine robes shredded, his hands slick with blood. His own, for once. The viewscreen flickered, its cracked surface struggling to hold an image. Through the static, the Erebus loomed, its scarred hull a silent accusation, its red veins pulsing with a rhythm that mocked his faltering pulse. Zaresh's breath came in ragged gasps, each one a battle against the smoke choking the air. He'd lost everything, his fleet, his ship, his illusion of divinity. And yet the humans weren't done. They wanted more than his defeat. They wanted his soul. Kane's voice slithered into his mind again, unbidden, inescapable. You thought power was yours alone. It was calm now, a predator's patience, each word a nail in Zaresh's coffin. We learned it from you, then made it ours. The Erebus shifted, its massive form aligning with the light of divinity's ruins, and a new sound pierced the silence, a low, grinding roar as docking clamps extended from its underside. They latched onto the flagship's remains with a jolt that threw Zaresh to the floor, metal screeching as the human ship began to pull them in. He clawed his way to his feet, panic surging through him. "No," he rasped, his voice a shadow of its former command. "Not like this." He stumbled towards the weapons console, or what was left of it, fingers fumbling over dead controls. A surviving officer, his face half-burned, grabbed his arm. "High Lord, we're breached," he croaked. "They're boarding." Zaresh's head snapped toward the corridor beyond the bridge. The distant clang of boots echoed through the ship, growing louder, closer. Humans. Not their machines, not their weapons, but them, coming to finish what their warship had started. He drew his ceremonial blade, a useless relic now, its edge dulled by centuries of peace, and turned to face the inevitable. The first humans emerged from the smoke, shadows in battered armor, their faces obscured by visors streaked with ash. They moved with purpose, weapons raised, crude, ugly things, nothing like the Ascendant's elegant tools of war. Yet they'd won. Zaresh raised his blade, a final act of defiance, but a shot rang out, and it clattered from his hand, his wrist screaming with pain. He fell to his knees, disarmed, defenseless. A figure stepped forward, taller than the rest, his armor marked with a single red stripe. He removed his helmet, revealing Coin's scarred face, those blackened steel eyes boring into Zaresh. "You don't get to die yet," Kane said, his voice low, steady. "Not until you see." "See what?" Zaresh spat, blood dripping from his lips. "Your vengeance? Your petty triumph?" Kane crouched, meeting his gaze. "Not ours. Theirs." He gestured to the soldiers behind him, their visors lifting one by one. Faces, human faces, stared back, each one etched with loss, with rage, with a fire Zaresh had never understood. They weren't just warriors. They were survivors. The remnants of worlds he'd burned, lives he'd erased. "You thought us gone," Coin said, rising. "But we remembered. Every name, every scream." He turned to his crew. "Take him." Hands seized Zaresh, dragging him through the wreckage, his protests drowned by the clamor of their boots. The Erebus swallowed them, its corridors dark and jagged, walls carved with more names, millions of them, a litany of the dead. Zaresh's strength failed, his body limp in their grasp. But his mind screamed. This wasn't defeat, this was damnation. And as they pulled him deeper into the ship, he realized. The humans hadn't just returned. They'd come to rewrite the stars. The Erebus's belly was a labyrinth of shadow and steel, its corridors a maze of jagged edges and flickering red light. Zaresh's captors dragged him through it, their grip ironclad, their silence deafening. His legs scraped against the rough floor, his once regal form reduced to a broken husk, blood and grime streaking his silver skin. The air was thick with the stench of oil and rust, a far cry from the sterile perfection of his lost flagship. But it wasn't the ship that chilled him. It was the names. They covered every wall, every panel, etched in crude, angry strokes. Tarsus, Elira, Vion. Worlds he'd crushed, lives he'd erased, each one a wound staring back at him. Cain led the way, his armored figure a dark beacon in the gloom, his steps deliberate, unhurried. The other humans followed, their faces, those he'd glimpsed, burned into Zaresh's mind. They weren't just soldiers. They were ghosts, resurrected from the ashes of his conquests. He'd never seen their kind as anything but insects, insignificant specks beneath his divine heel. Now they towered over him, their rage a palpable force that pressed against his chest. They stopped in a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in darkness, its walls lined with more names, too many to count. The floor was stained, dark patches glinting wetly under the dim light. Zaresh's stomach churned as he realized what it was. Blood, old and new, a testament to something he couldn't yet grasp. Cain turned, his scarred face unreadable, and nodded to his crew. They released Zaresh, letting him collapse onto the cold metal, his breath shallow, his body screaming with pain. "Stand," Cain said, his voice a quiet command. Zaresh didn't move, defiance flickering faintly in his chest. A boot slammed into his ribs, and he gasped, curling inward as agony flared. "Stand," Cain repeated, colder now. With trembling limbs, Zaresh obeyed, rising unsteadily, his silver eyes locked on the human's unrelenting gaze. "You think this is justice?" Zaresh rasped, his voice brittle. "Torturing me? Killing me? It changes nothing. My empire will—" "Your empire," Cain cut in, stepping closer, "is a lie built on bones." He gestured to the chamber, the names, the blood. "This isn't about you. It's about them." From the shadows, figures emerged, more humans, dozens of them, their faces gaunt, their eyes hollow but alive with a fire that made Zaresh flinch. They wore rags, their bodies marked with scars, their hands clutching makeshift weapons. Survivors. Not soldiers, but the ones who'd lived through his purges, who'd crawled from the rubble he'd left behind. A woman stepped forward, her hair matted, her voice trembling with fury. "You burned Elira," she said, pointing a shaking finger at him. "My daughter was 6. She screamed for me as your ships turned her to ash." Another man, older, his face a map of grief, spoke next. "Tarsus. My whole village. Gone in a night. You didn't even know our names." Zaresh's mouth opened, but no words came. He'd never heard their voices, never cared to. They'd been numbers, resources, obstacles. Now they surrounded him, a chorus of pain and hate, their stories crashing over him like waves. Cain watched, silent, as the survivors closed in, their hands reaching, their eyes promising retribution. "You'll see," Cain said, his voice a low growl. "Every world you took, every life you stole, they're here, and they remember." He stepped back, and the crowd surged forward. Zaresh screamed as they seized him, their fingers digging into his flesh, their voices rising in a roar of anguish and rage. He fought, weakly, but there were too many, their strength born of suffering he'd inflicted. They dragged him toward a platform at the chamber's center, its surface stained with more blood, its purpose clear. Zaresh's mind fractured, terror swallowing his pride. He'd called himself a god, but gods don't beg. Yet as the humans raised their weapons, he did. And the Erebus echoed with their cries, a requiem for the divine. The platform in the Erebus's blood-stained chamber was cold beneath Zaresh's knees, its surface slick with the ghosts of those who'd come before him. The survivors' hands held him down, their grip unrelenting, their voices a storm of grief and fury that drowned his pleas. His silver eyes darted wildly, searching for an escape that didn't exist, his once divine composure shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. Above him, the names on the walls loomed, a silent jury bearing witness to his end. He'd ruled galaxies, crushed worlds with a thought. But here, in the belly of this human warship, he was nothing. Kyne stood at the edge of the platform, his scarred face a mask of cold resolve, his blackened steel eyes fixed on Zaresh. The survivors pressed closer, their makeshift weapons, shards of metal, broken tools, gleaming in the dim light. The woman from Elira stepped forward again, her trembling hands clutching a jagged blade. "For my daughter," she whispered, her voice breaking as she raised it high. Zaresh's scream was cut short as the blade fell, biting into his shoulder, blood spraying across the platform. Pain seared through him, raw and mortal, and he thrashed against their hold, but they were too many, too strong. The old man from Tarsus was next, his weathered hands steady as he drove a rusted spike into Zaresh's side. "For my village," he growled, twisting it deeper. Zaresh's vision blurred, his breath coming in wet, choking gasps. One by one, they took their turn. Each strike a name, a memory, a debt repaid. His body became a canvas of their vengeance, his blood mingling with the stains beneath him, his godhood bleeding out with every blow. Kyne watched in silence, his presence a steady anchor amid the chaos. When the last survivor stepped back, panting, their weapons dripping, Zaresh was a ruin, alive, barely, his chest heaving, his silver eyes dull with agony. The chamber fell quiet, the air heavy with the weight of what they'd done. Kyne stepped onto the platform, his boots ringing against the metal, and crouched beside the fallen High Lord. "You thought us weak," he said, his voice low, almost gentle. "You thought us gone. But we endured. We built this—" He gestured to the Erebus, its scarred hull a testament to their survival. "From the ashes you left us." He leaned closer, his breath warm against Zaresh's ear. "Your empire will fall. Not today, not tomorrow, but it will. And when it does, they'll know who broke it." Zaresh's lips moved, a faint whisper escaping. "Kill me. Please." His voice was a broken thing, a plea from a man who'd never known mercy until he needed it. Kyne shook his head. "Number you live. You carry this back to your kind." He stood, turning to his crew. "Patch him up. Send him home." The survivors murmured, some protesting, but Kyne's gaze silenced them. "Death's too easy. Let him tell them what he's seen." They obeyed, dragging Zaresh's mangled form away, his blood trailing behind him. Hours later, a battered escape pod launched from the Erebus, limping toward ascendant space, carrying a message in flesh and ruin. The warship turned, its engines flaring red as it vanished into the void, leaving Kailara's ashes behind. On the Erebus's bridge, Kyne stood alone, staring at the stars. The names on the walls whispered to him, millions of voices, quiet now, but not at peace. They'd won this battle, broken a god, but the war was far from over. He touched a scar on his cheek, a memory